From NBC News, the inauguration of George W. Bush. Live from Washington, here is Tom Brokaw.
Good morning, everyone. The stately and peaceful transfer of power in the United States of America in the year 2001, January 20th, the end of the presidency of William Jefferson Clinton, the beginning of the presidency of George W. Bush of Texas. They've just left the White House. They're making their way in that very slow and majestic fashion to the nation's capital, where on the west steps of the Capitol, George W. Bush will be sworn in as President of the United States at high noon today, with his mother and father looking on. The first father-son presidency since the early part of the 19th century, the Adams family. I'm joined here by NBC's Washington Bureau Chief Moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert, who will be here for the next several hours. This, Tim, is always an important lesson, not only in civics, but in the idea of citizenship and the idea of public service.
Particularly this year, Tom, because this election was so close and so controversial. And yet today, on this Saturday morning, we see, as you called it, peaceful transformation of power. It's quite striking.
And in that motorcade as well, for the first time that we've seen him in several weeks now, is Vice President Al Gore, who is not only giving up his office today, but of course he is giving up his claim on the presidency. He finished with 500,000 more votes in popular terms than did George W. Bush. But under the rules that we all play by in America, George W. Bush won the electoral vote. The disputed election in Florida was settled at the highest court in the land by a 5-4 decision. And George W. Bush is determined to demonstrate to this country that he is the president of all the people. As one of his aides said, we're going to act as if we won big, because we want to get off to a fast start and demonstrate to America that while their expectations may be low, ours are not.
He can't do it any other way. You're president for a very brief time. I'm sure as we watch Bill Clinton today, in his mind, the last 8 years just flew by. You mentioned Al Gore. Not only is it painful losing the election to George W. Bush, but his relationship with Bill Clinton is very strained. Some people suggest they're not even speaking to one another because of the campaign disagreements they had about whether or not he should have embraced Clintonism more than he did.
Let's go to the Hill now and to the VIP area, and NBC's Maria Shriver there is with the new National Security Advisor to the incoming president, Condoleezza Rice. Maria?
Thank you very much, Tom. That's right. I am here with Condoleezza Rice. This is her first inauguration. She said she just came from church and she cried the whole way. What's this been like for you?
It's very exciting, and it's such a wonderful affirmation of America and the peaceful transfer of power. It's really quite moving.
Have you spoken to the president-elect this morning?
I've not spoken to him this morning. I saw him at church just in front of me. It's just a wonderful day for everyone involved.
What does he have to accomplish here today to reach out to the millions of people who felt disenfranchised by this election, who don't feel that he's their president yet?
I believe that all that he has to do is to be himself and to talk in the language of inclusion that he has always used all of his public life. He is a sincere person, and he said time and time again he's going to be the president for everybody. I think he's going to start that with the speech today. That's the way this country is. The American people are going to accept him and embrace him.
I heard Vice President-elect Cheney say just the other day there are a lot of hot spots around the world right now that this administration has got to get onto very quickly. What's going to be your first order of business this week?
Well, I think our first order of business will be to try to really understand what we're facing in a number of parts of the world. I want to say that the Clinton foreign policy team has been terrific. Sandy Berger and Madeleine Albright and Secretary Cohen have been fantastic. We think we're off to a good start, but we'll obviously look hard at places like the Middle East and see what we're facing.
Condoleezza Rice, I know you got to get back to your seat. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tom, as you can see here on the west side of the Capitol, everybody is dressed in this VIP area in these ponchos that they've handed out, and I've heard a lot of women talking about whether they look stupid or not. That's been the big talk. Obviously, you have all the Chief Justices up here, leaders of the Senate. Now we have coming up Vice President Mrs. Quayle. It's all tightly scripted, tightly orchestrated up here, and you'll see it all as they come down. Back to you.
Thanks very much, NBC's Maria Shriver. That would be a concern for the men and the women alike. They spend a lot of money on a new wardrobe, get just the right dress for inaugural day, and then they have this kind of inclement weather, and they have to put plastic sheeting over it all. As they continue to make their way to the Capitol, the presidential motorcade carrying the two first families and the two vice presidential families. We should tell you that there was some thought today they may have to move this inside. They did that in 1985, you'll recall, for the second inauguration of Ronald Reagan when it was bitterly cold, wind chill of 20 degrees below zero, but they are confident they'll be able to keep this outside today, and no doubt there will be lots of metaphors about gloomy skies, but the promise of a sunnier day tomorrow. Let's go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell now, who is with one of the invited visitors, Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York. Andrea?
Thanks, Tom. I'm here with the mayor, who, do you have any second thoughts? You know, Hillary Clinton is going to be, as Senator Clinton, sitting up there.
No, I'm very content with the decision that I made. I got another year as mayor of New York City. I had the last 6 months to go through my treatment for prostate cancer, which will be over within about 2 months, and I'll be back to normal. I'm pretty much back to normal already, I hope.
You told me that you had your last treatment the other day.
I had seeds, radiation, and hormone therapy for 9 months. So that'll last in my system about another 2 or 3 months, and I'm very hopeful that we licked it and cured it, and we'll find out in a few months.
You'll be leaving after your 2 terms, and you can relate to the way Bill Clinton is probably feeling giving up power today.
Yeah, I was thinking about him last night when I came in about 11 o'clock at night. We walked past the White House, took a look at it, and I was thinking about it has to be a sad night no matter what, as if you come to the end of your term. But in a certain way, it's actually easier for him as it will be for me. You weren't voted out of office. You're leaving on your own power and by operational law. So I think actually that's a little bit easier than if you had been voted out of office.
Rudy Giuliani, thanks very much.
Thank
Lots
you,
of luck to you.
Wonderful to see you. Have a happy day.
Thank you. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Andrea. It has been a tumultuous final 36 hours for former president, about to be Bill Clinton. He made a speech to the nation on Thursday night. He struck a deal with the independent prosecutor yesterday in which he'll lose his law license for 5 years and pay a fine. And he acknowledged that he willfully misled the people who were questioning him in the Paula Jones case. And then overnight he issued another 100 pardons, including one to his brother, former Housing Secretary Henry Cisneros, and Suzanne McDougal, who was a principal figure in the Whitewater case. No pardons for Michael Milken, the junk bond king, or Leonard Peltier, who is serving a life sentence for the murder of 2 FBI agents in the famous or infamous Wounded Knee incident. Now let's go down to NBC's David Gregory, who has been covering the George Bush campaign from the beginning. And David, we do expect this to be a short speech. What's going to be the tone?
Well, it's certainly going to be a tone of unity, a call for unity. We both know this new president to be a plain-spoken fella, as he likes to say. He's going to be to the point. The speech is going to be relatively short. He said as of a couple of days ago, no more than about 13 minutes. Let me share some of the excerpts with you. He's going to promise to make a, quote, new commitment to fulfill the promise of the nation, and he's going to do it through a series of C words: civility, courage, compassion, and character. That last one, of course, a direct shot at the outgoing President Clinton. He will say, quote, "I will live and lead by these principles." And later on, he says, in what will no doubt be an attempt to inspire the nation, especially after the tumultuous election cycle and post-election cycle we've all gone through, quote, "What you do is as important as anything government does." He will call on the country. He'll say, "I'll ask you to be citizens, not spectators, responsible citizens, building communities of service and a nation of character." Certainly themes that we've heard throughout the campaign, Tom, and certainly he'll stick to those principles. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, NBC's David Gregory. Let's go to NBC's John Siegenthaler, who's there for the arrival of the presidential motorcade. John?
Well, Tom, the limousines have just pulled up in the front of the Capitol, and as we've been talking throughout, this is very tight security for this event, the largest law enforcement presence ever for an inauguration in this country. And there, the limousine with the President of the United States and the President-elect is pulling up to the Capitol. This is the same spot where we saw former President Carter arrive a little while ago, and former President Bush, along with his wife Barbara and the grandchildren Barbara and Jenna. We can only imagine what conversation has been going on inside that limousine as they made their way, as you said, stately way up up the avenue up to the Capitol. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, John Siegenthaler. They're now getting out of the presidential motorcade. There's a holding room there in the Capitol Law Library, and they'll be in there for a time. Then there is a ritual that does play out as people are introduced and brought onto the west side of the Capitol. That was the idea of Michael Deaver, who was a principal advisor to President Ronald Reagan, looking west, a man who'd come from the west. It also gives you the panorama of the nation's capital with the mall spread out before you. These are the keepers of the Capitol from the Senate and the House side, the people who make the system work there on a daily basis. And that is some of the crowd that has been assembled. Bob Dole, the former senator and also the former presidential candidate, with his wife, Liddy, who may, in fact, be named to a cabinet post, which would be the UN ambassadorship. There's been some discussion about that, although it's not been resolved yet.
Senator Dole was seen in the lobby of a hotel last night, Tom, practicing the oath of office just in case he was needed. Hasn't lost his humor.
No. There's Vice President Al Gore, who was in this long, bitterly contested election against George W. Bush. 3 baby boomers. And then Dick Cheney, who is the senior member of the team. He was born during the war. And Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida, a man who was in all the intersections of the disputed election there as well. He had originally been thought to be the best hope in the Bush family to become the president, but he lost his first run for governor in Florida to Lawton Childs, and his brother won in Texas unexpectedly against Ann Richards. And so he got to be the presidential candidate, and Jeb had the daunting task of trying to deliver Florida. That's his son next to him, who is now a law student and a major heartthrob in this country.
George P.
George P. Well, look at that. The governor and the brother of the new president-elect is like every other tourist. He's got his little throwaway camera there and taking
Kodak moment.
Right. Maria Shriver, you still down there?
Relegated back into the very back, but I'm still here and I can still see everything. It's rather interesting to note that all the Bush family members, which is kind of interesting, they're all taking pictures of themselves right up as close to the podium as they can get. They can't even get that close, but you can get a real sense here that this is very much of a family event. They're grouping off cousins together, taking pictures. Everybody's got Instamatics. And you see a lot of schmoozing going on up here between people who are cabinet designees and leaders of the Senate and the House. So while everybody stands here in the rain waiting, there's a lot of politicking and a lot of backslapping going on up here.
NBC's Lisa Myers is on Capitol Hill. There are members of Congress. Well, let's take a look at former President Jimmy Carter talking with the incoming Secretary of State, Colin Powell. Jimmy Carter has been a model ex-president working in not just the third world, but in the fourth and fifth world, and using his Carter Center for the resolution of conflict. The two men really did save President Clinton a lot of grief when they went to Haiti and made a deal before the 82nd Airborne had to arrive there in what was going to be a very difficult time. Jenna Bush on your left, one of the twins, and Barbara on your right. I think I finally worked that all out. Jenna Bush had an emergency appendectomy at Christmas time, and then, of course, Barbara Bush and the former president, Poppy, as he's called in the family. What a moment for them today.
I actually had a chance to ask former President Bush last night, how must it feel to have his son become the president? And Tom, his eyes just moistened. He couldn't answer. He just is so overwhelmed with emotion, and it's so wonderful to see.
He's had a hip replacement surgery, so he does have a small limp, but he's getting around. There's a big party for him last night given by his old friend Jim Baker, who was such a pivotal figure in Florida. That's Colin and Alma Powell talking with Rosalynn and Jimmy Carter.
There's Don Evans in the red scarf. President George W. Bush's closest friend, the new Secretary of Commerce.
And just behind and to the right of Mrs. Powell is Paul O'Neill, the new Treasury Secretary. there in the rain gear that has been handed out. Let's go to NBC's Lisa Myers now. Lisa, tell us about the Congressional Black Caucus.
Well, there's an interesting dynamic going on among many Democrats today, Tom, and that is usually when you set up a live camera on a day like this, you have to beat the politicians away with your umbrella. But today, a number of members of the Black Caucus are boycotting this event altogether. They say they don't consider Bush a legitimate president, that this is, frankly, is not their party. But even many Democrats who are here today are choosing not to be interviewed. And privately, they tell you this, they see this as a lose-lose situation. On one hand, they're expected to be gracious. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Lisa. We are seeing the Bush daughters now come down the steps and being welcomed onto the VIP platform. Jenna, the one that you see there, is a student at the University of Texas, and her sister Barbara is a student. That's Liddy Dole giving a kiss to Barbara Bush. Is a student at Yale University. They are said to be distinctly different. One likes a good time more than the other. The other one is a little more studious, and I'm not even going to give away the secrets as to which is which. We're going to begin the protection right now. They do deserve to have as normal a life as they possibly can have. Jim Baker there with the red scarf just behind his longtime friend George Bush Sr., Herbert Walker Bush. President and Mrs. Clinton made an appeal to the press corps, which has been largely honored, that Chelsea should be able to go to Stanford and have a life without the constant intrusion of cameras, and by and large that has been honored. And for the Bush family, it's worked out pretty well too. Governor Bush told me last week that the one thing that worries him most of all is that the girls are disappointed that he ran because they think it's going to change their lives. Obviously, they're going to love this moment today. But can they go anywhere without Secret Service agents? No. Will they always be known as the daughters of the president? Yes. And they'll wonder about friends and boyfriends and what their interests are, what motivates them.
You know, Tom, the president-elect planned on emailing his daughters on a daily basis, and now he has said that he cannot email. He is giving up his email because he found out that every note he made, every message he received would be part of the public record, even to his daughters, which doesn't sound right.
No, and you know, I've talked to Colin Powell about that. He no longer keeps a diary. Here's a man who's been in the cockpit of history, and because he kept some notes when he was at the Defense Department as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on an airplane deal, he spent the next year and a half in court or being deposed, and so he just doesn't keep a note anymore. Doris Kearns-Goodwin joins us now as we look at all this. She's our presidential historian, not just on staff here, but of course to America. And Doris, there is something that is quite sad about that as we watch Senator Hillary Clinton come now with Tipper Gore, that people can't keep notes or a record anymore without thinking it's going to be in the National Enquirer in 48 hours.
Oh, for those of us who are historians, it's disastrous, not only sad. I mean, when I go back and look at Lincoln, I have diaries of their children, diaries of the husbands and wives, thousands of letters that they wrote to one another, all of which have been saved. We know more about Lincoln's administration than we're going to know about the Clinton administration 100 years from now. I say keep the diary, put it in a closet separately. Don't let them ever know.
Well, we ought to have some legislation, frankly.
That's what we need. There has to be a private life that is protected, and there's nothing more sacred than the words you write to yourself in your diary. Remember, you're a little kid. You preserve that from your parents. We should be able to preserve that from history.
Or not being able to email your own daughters?
No.
Something has gone amok.
Common sense dictates let's do something right now.
Speaking of daughters?
Speaking of daughters, there's Chelsea Clinton, as we have been saying throughout the morning, unusually poised for a young woman of her age and what she has been through with the public difficulties of her father especially, speaking with the Carter family. Maria Shriver down there on the stage. It's beginning to fill up, Maria, so we're pretty close to that moment when we're going to begin to see the new president.
We are very close to that moment, and that'll be very tightly scripted as well. Mrs. Clinton, Senator Clinton, will be coming in with Mrs. Gore President Clinton and Vice President Gore. We should mention that Chief Justice Rehnquist will be giving the oath of office to President-elect Bush. He is also the same Chief Justice who gave the oath of office to his father. Another little thing for trivia experts is that Franklin Graham, Reverend Billy Graham's son, will be doing his first invocation. Reverend Billy Graham did it for his father. And now coming in, you see coming down here, I believe, is Mrs. Senator Clinton and Mrs. Gore, who I believe are coming here. All eyes are now towards that door as people come down. The last few VIP guests come down here, down these steps, come through the Capitol out here onto the west side. Senator Clinton and Mrs. Gore. Obviously a very emotional day for both of them as they begin their new lives after today.
Maria, let's just pause for a moment and watch this. Let our audience absorb this moment and collect their own thoughts as we see Lynn Cheney and Laura Bush. Goodwin, there is a kind of populist majesty about all of this. These Americans who come from all walks of life, some from Arkansas, some from Wyoming, some from Texas, some from Tennessee, gather together on this day, surrounded by the people's representatives in the House and in the Senate, in the Capitol, which is, after all, the people's house, to make the transfer of power to the White House.
No question.
We do it in a ritual that has been worked out over many, many years. It stays the same. We have a fixed date, the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. It's quite reassuring.
Oh, I think there's no question. It's one of those moments when you really feel the past and you feel the present and you even feel the future. And people know that George Washington used the same Bible that these people will be using today. Think of that. I mean, that's just an amazing thing. The first time it really became a people's ceremony was Andrew Jackson, however, when everybody floated from Tennessee, even overrunning the White House until there was so much drinking going on. They had to throw the kegs outside to get the people outside. But except for that problem, it's great that it's a people's ceremony.
We have some advanced degrees among these women. Laura Bush has a master's degree in a Master of Science in Library Science, and Lynn Cheney has a PhD in English literature from the University of Colorado, as I remember.
In fact, I think it's the first time that all the candidates' wives had advanced degrees. It shows the future is going to mean that first ladies will be much more active forces. I think Hillary Clinton will be a beacon for the future rather than some eccentric person as Eleanor Roosevelt was. There's no way you can keep these ladies down once they've been doing something before they get there, and I think it's great.
Tricia Lott passing in front of Laura Bush right now.
When you look at Laura Bush, Tom, you can only think how many times she's been asked, when you first met George W. Bush, did you ever dream he'd be president of the United States? And she says, no.
No. And neither did members of his family or his college classmates or his prep school classmates. He was, by his own description and theirs as well, pretty much a party-hardy guy who did drift through the first few years of his life until he got some objectives as the owner of the Texas Rangers, obviously, and then got into politics, running first for Congress and losing, then running for the governorship.
You know, it's interesting, even the other son, John Quincy Adams, once said, I'd rather clean filth off the street than go into politics. But he felt the pressure of his father. His father said, if you don't make it to the highest office, it'll be laziness, slovenliness. So there's a little pressure there. I don't think this guy felt the pressure in the same way. I think it's sort of eventually came to him. He didn't feel it from the time he was a kid,
although
the way Quincy did.
His dad is calling him Quincy.
Yes, I noticed.
Now the outgoing administration. The gaggle of photographers that will follow the new president everywhere. Diana Walker, there in the lead from Time Magazine, a Washington resident who's one of the very best of the press photographers in this town. and the Secret Service agents and the other attendants from Capitol Hill. Chris Dodd trailing the Vice President and the President with Richard Gephardt, who is the Democratic leader in the House. We can only wonder what Al Gore must be thinking as he walks down there now as the outgoing Vice President after this long and difficult campaign that he ran against George W. Bush, knowing that he did get more popular votes, but not enough electoral college votes to become the president. We still don't know what he's going to do, nor do we know exactly what President Clinton's going to do once they leave office.
Not much small talk between the president and vice president, Tom. Both looking straight ahead. Difficult walk for Al Gore.
One can only imagine that he's thinking 4 years from now, maybe it will be a different kind of walk, just as it was 8 years before.
The other thought that you could have is that, oh, God, do I have to go through that again? It's so exhausting. You have to start 2 years from now, you know, go out and organize across the country, raise the money, get everybody in place. People are just going to say you were a loser once. They're going to be coming after him in a different way than they did the last time. Let's just watch them come in here for a moment now and let our audience absorb this moment. They've slipped on top coats. Tipper with her camera out. She took it very hard, this loss, not unexpectedly. Quite bitter. The vice president was optimistic to the very end. He honestly thought that he was going to win either in the courts or by count in Florida and become the president. He was deeply immersed in the process. That's an exclusive club. Presidents of the United States right there, 2 members.
The man who defeated George Bush for president in 1992, and now the inauguration of his son, who defeated Bill Clinton's hand-picked vice president. What's going on through their minds? Dick Cheney, who will be turning 60 years old in just a matter of 10 days, Tom Brokaw.
I know something about that birthday.
Very young.
And even if you're vice president, it's not fun. I think Dick Cheney proved to be an enormous asset for George W. Bush, both during the campaign and especially in the post-election period. The country saw him in that debate against Joe Lieberman, and they were deeply impressed by his judgment and his calmness and his ability to articulate positions. He has served in the highest positions in government short of the presidency: Defense Secretary, White House Chief of Staff, member of Congress for 10 years. A conservative voting record, to say the least, but a man who was highly regarded across party lines here for his judgment on big issues.
The office of the vice presidency just seems to be accumulating power with each new president. It's something that I think anyone who's interested in serving the country or in higher office should want to have now, compared to the past when it was seen like a graveyard. It is totally transformed from what it once was.
A little nerve-wracking experience.
Lady Bird Johnson is there as well, as part of the...
Oh, isn't that amazing? You know, Mrs. Woodrow Wilson was at John Kennedy's inauguration.
Mrs. Bush, Laura Bush, has said that she really admires her as one of the first ladies that she thinks so highly of, another Texan, obviously.
And so she should. She had grace, class. She was an extraordinary First Lady.
Dick Cheney followed by Republican leaders Dick Armey and Trent Lott. Well, now they're chatting a little bit. You know, Harry Truman was not told by FDR about the development of the atomic bomb. Can you imagine that? Then FDR died, and guess who had to make the decision about whether we were going to drop it?
Yeah, I think it was one of FDR's greatest failures. I think he couldn't face his own illness and his own potential death. He didn't want to think about it. So giving that information to his successor seemed too hard, but it left him totally bereft. But he made the decision with never looking back.
Exactly the same expression George W. Bush had walking out on the stage for the debates. He goes into his zone, it seems. It's time to be serious. And there will be no more serious moment in his lifetime in 17 minutes from now.
He brings his athletic demeanor to these occasions, it seems to me, Tim. He gets himself kind of physically up for the moment, and the confidence in his stride, the body language that he gives off. And having grown up in that family, obviously, he's been through big occasions before, which helps some, too.
It's something you have to learn, isn't it, Doris? How do you carry yourself as a president? Everyone's watching you at every moment.
You can't slouch at a moment like this. You know, you're right, though. You brought up in that family from the time he's been little. He's been learning how to shake hands with people, to be polite. You watch that in the Kennedy family, so it's ingrown in the blood.
When I asked Mrs. Bush last week if she said, Mr. President-elect, you have to pick up your socks. Things, you know, haven't changed. She said, well, no, it hasn't changed a lot. I still have to tell him to sit up. And he quickly sat up.
Oh, wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, George Walker Bush, accompanied by Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Christopher Dodd, Speaker J. Dennis Hastert, Senator Trent Lott, Representative Richard Armey, Representative Richard Gephardt, Jim Ziegler, Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Bill Livingood, House Sergeant-at-Arms, and Tamara Somerville, Chief of Staff, Joint Congressional Committee for Inaugural Ceremonies. Since 1961, Tom, where a father has been able to witness his son take the oath of office, Joseph Kennedy and John Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, and there's a great story of that. When John Kennedy was coming down the inaugural parade and saw his father in the reviewing stand, he actually saw the father tip his hat to him. Eunice Shriver said she nearly fainted the first time the father had ever given deference to the son. John Kennedy stood up, tipped his hat to his father, the only person he did that. So what a feeling it must be. I mean, there's no way we can underestimate what George Bush Sr. must be feeling.
That, too, was a close election, and I remember Joseph Kennedy said, I didn't pay for a landslide.
That's right. He was a frugal character in the end.
To the 54th inauguration of the President and Vice President of the United States of America. Today, we honor the past in commemorating 2 centuries of inaugurations in Washington, D.C. As well, we embrace the future, this day marking the first inauguration of the 21st century and the new millennium. America has now spanned 4 centuries, her promise still shining bright, the beginning and present linked by timeless ideals and faith. The enduring strength of our Constitution, which brings us to the west front of the Capitol today, attests to the wisdom of America's founders. and the heroism of generations of Americans who fought wars and toiled in peace to preserve this legacy of liberty. In becoming the 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush will assume the sacred trust as guardian of our Constitution. Dick Cheney will be sworn in as our new Vice President. Witnessed by the Congress, Supreme Court, governors, and presidents past, the current president will stand by as the new president peacefully takes office. This is a triumph of our democratic republic, a ceremony befitting a great nation. In his father's stead, the Reverend Franklin Graham is with us today to lead the nation in prayer. Please stand for the invocation. Reverend Graham.
Let us pray. Blessed are you, O Lord our God. Yours, O God, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, O Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and to give strength to all. As President Lincoln once said, we have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power, as no other nation has ever grown, but we have forgotten God. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended powers, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness. O Lord, as we come together on this historic and solemn occasion to inaugurate once again a president and vice president, teach us afresh that power, wisdom, and salvation come only from your hand. We pray, O Lord, for President-elect George W. Bush and Vice President-elect Richard B. Cheney, to whom you have entrusted leadership of this nation at this moment in history. We pray that you'll help them bring our country together so that we may rise above partisan politics and seek the larger vision of your will for our nation. Use them to bring reconciliation between the races, healing to political wounds, that we may truly become one nation under God. Give our new president and all who advise him calmness in the face of storms, encouragement in the face of frustration, and humility in the face of success. Give them the wisdom to know and to do what is right, and the courage to say no to all that is contrary to your statutes and holy law. Lord, we pray for their families, and especially their wives, Laura Bush and Lynn Cheney, that they may sense your presence and know your love. Today we entrust to you President and Senator Clinton and Vice President and Mrs. Gore. Lead them as they journey through new doors of opportunity to serve others. Now, O Lord, we dedicate this presidential inaugural ceremony to you. May this be the beginning of a new dawn for America as we humble ourselves before you and acknowledge you alone as our Lord, our Savior, and our Redeemer. We pray this in the name of the Father, and of the Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Graham. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the DuPont Manual Choir of Louisville, Kentucky. Senator Christopher J. Dodd of Connecticut to introduce the Chief Justice of the United States.
Thank you, Senator McConnell. President and Senator Clinton, Vice President and Mrs. Gore, President-elect and Mrs. Bush, and fellow citizens. The Vice President-elect will now take the oath of office. His wife, Lynn, and their daughters, Elizabeth Cheney Perry and Mary Cheney, will hold the family Bible. I have the honor and privilege to now present the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable William Hobbs Rehnquist, to administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect, Richard Bruce Cheney.
Mr. Cheney, are you ready to take the oath?
I am.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Richard Bruce Cheney, do solemnly swear.
I, Richard Bruce Cheney, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr.
We have a new president in waiting. Richard Bruce Cheney shaking hands with the outgoing Vice President Al Gore. He flunked out of Yale twice, went back, worked as a power lineman for a year, and then ended up at the University of Wyoming, did graduate work at the University of Wisconsin, and came here and became a wonder kid almost immediately.
You know, watching him kiss his wife, when Garfield kissed his mother at his presidential inauguration, the press thought it was lacking in dignity. It was theatrical. Now they all kiss.
The United States Army Band will now perform an American medley.
Of thee.
It is now my high honor to again present the Chief Justice of the United States, who will administer the presidential oath of office. Everyone, please stand.
Governor, are you ready to take the oath?
I am, sir.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Gun salute, the outgoing president and the new president. The man he vanquished in a long, difficult campaign, Al Gore, Senator Dodd, the new president of the United States, George Walker Bush, with his father. Second time in American history, and he is obviously very moved by this historic moment and deeply personal moment in his life. He said last week he would try to stay focused and not look at his parents, but when he embraced his father, understandably, it was a moment in which he deserved to be as emotional as he obviously is.
John Adams was 90 years old when his son became president. He said nothing made him more blissfully happy, so intense he couldn't even express his feelings. I can only imagine what Mr. Bush Sr. is thinking.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, George W. Bush.
Thank you all. Chief Justice Rehnquist, President Carter, President Bush, President Clinton, distinguished guests, and my fellow citizens. The peaceful transfer of authority is rare in history, yet common in our country. With a simple oath, we affirm old traditions and make new beginnings. As I begin, I thank President Clinton for his service to our nation. And I thank Vice President Gore for a contest conducted with spirit and ended with grace. I am honored and humbled to stand here where so many of America's leaders have come before me, and so many will follow. We have a place, all of us, in a long story, a story we continue, but whose end we will not see. It is a story of a new world that became a friend and liberator of the old. The story of a slave-holding society that became a servant of freedom. The story of a power that went into the world to protect but not possess, to defend but not to conquer. It is the American story, a story of flawed and fallible people united across the generations by grand and enduring ideals. The grandest of these ideals is an unfolding American promise that everyone belongs, that everyone deserves a chance,
that no insignificant person was ever born. Americans are called to enact this promise in our lives and in our laws. And though our nation has sometimes halted and sometimes delayed, we must follow no other course. Through much of the last century, America's faith in freedom and democracy was a rock in a raging sea. Now it is a seed upon the wind, taking root in many nations. Our democratic faith is more than the creed of our country. It is the inborn hope of our humanity, an ideal we carry but do not own, a trust we bear and pass along. Even after nearly 225 years, we have a long way yet to travel. While many of our citizens prosper, others doubt the promise, even the justice of our own country. The ambitions of some Americans are limited by failing schools and hidden prejudice and the circumstances of their birth. And sometimes our differences run so deep, it seems we share a continent, but not a country. We do not accept this, and we will not allow it. Our unity, our union, is the serious work of leaders and citizens and every generation. And this is my solemn pledge. I will work to build a single nation of justice and opportunity. I know this was in our reach because we are guided by a power larger than ourselves, who creates us equal in his image. And we are confident in principles that unite and lead us onward. America has never been united by blood or birth or soil. We are bound by ideals that move us beyond our backgrounds, lift us above our interests, and teach us what it means to be citizens. Every child must be taught these principles. Every citizen must uphold them. And every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less, American. Today, we affirm a new commitment to live out our nation's promise through civility, courage, compassion, and character. America at its best matches a commitment to principle with a concern for civility. A civil society demands from each of us goodwill and respect, fair dealing, and forgiveness. Some seem to believe that our politics can afford to be petty because in a time of peace the stakes of our debates appear small. But the stakes for America are never small. If our country does not lead the cause of freedom, it will not be led. If we do not turn the hearts of children toward knowledge and character, we will lose their gifts and undermine their idealism. If we permit our economy to drift and decline, the vulnerable will suffer most. We must live up to the calling we share. Civility is not a tactic or a sentiment. It is the determined choice of trust over cynicism, of community over chaos. And this commitment, if we keep it, is a way to shared accomplishment. America at its best is also courageous. Our national courage has been clear in times of depression and war, when defeating common dangers defined our common good. Now we must choose if the example of our fathers and mothers will inspire us or condemn us. We must show courage in a time of blessing by confronting problems instead of passing them on to future generations. Together we will reclaim America's schools before ignorance and apathy claim more young lives. We will reform Social Security and Medicare sparing our children from struggles we have the power to prevent. And we'll reduce taxes to recover the momentum of our economy and reward the effort and enterprise of working Americans. We will build our defenses beyond challenge, lest weakness invite challenge. We will confront weapons of mass destruction so that a new century is spared new horrors. The enemies of liberty in our country should make no mistake. America remains engaged in the world by history and by choice, shaping a balance of power that favors freedom. We will defend our allies and our interests. We will show purpose without arrogance. We will meet aggression and bad faith with resolve and strength. And to all nations, we will speak for the values that gave our nation birth. America at its best is compassionate. In the quiet of American conscience, we know that deep, persistent poverty is unworthy of our nation's promise. And whatever our views of its cause, we can agree that children at risk are not at fault. Abandonment and abuse are not acts of God. They are failures of love. And the proliferation of prisons, however necessary, is no substitute for hope and order in our souls. Where there is suffering, there is duty. Americans in need are not strangers. They are citizens, not problems, but priorities. And all of us are diminished when any are hopeless. Government has great responsibilities for public safety and public health, for civil rights and common schools. Yet compassion is the work of a nation, not just a government. And some needs and hurts are so deep, they will only respond to a mentor's touch or a pastor's prayer. Church and charity, synagogue and mosque lend our communities their humanity, and they will have an honored place in our plans and in our laws. Many in our country do not know the pain of poverty, but we can listen to those who do. And I can pledge our nation to a goal. When we see that wounded traveler on the road to Jericho, we will not pass to the other side. America at its best is a place where personal responsibility is valued and expected. Encouraging responsibility is not a search for scapegoats. It is a call to conscience. And though it requires sacrifice, it brings a deeper fulfillment. We find the fullness of life not only in options, but in commitments. And we find that children and community are the commitments that set us free. Our public interest depends on private character, on civic duty and family bonds and basic fairness, on uncounted, unhonored acts of decency, which give direction to our freedom. Sometimes in life we're called to do great things, but as a saint of our times has said, every day we are called to do small things with great love. The most important tasks of a democracy are done by everyone. I will live and lead by these principles, to advance my convictions with civility, to pursue the public interest with courage, to speak for greater justice and compassion, to call for responsibility and try to live it as well. In all these ways, I will bring the values of our history to the care of our times. What you do is as important as anything government does. I ask you to seek a common good beyond your comfort, to defend needed reforms against easy attacks, to serve your nation beginning with your neighbor. I ask you to be citizens, citizens not spectators, citizens not subjects, responsible citizens building communities of service and a nation of character. Americans are generous and strong and decent not because we believe in ourselves, but because we hold beliefs beyond ourselves. When this spirit of citizenship is missing, no government program can replace it. When this spirit is present, no wrong can stand against it. After the Declaration of Independence was signed, Virginia statesman John Page wrote to Thomas Jefferson, "We know the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?" Much time has passed since Jefferson arrived for his inauguration. The years and changes accumulate. But the themes of this day, he would know. Our nation's grand story of courage and its simple dream of dignity. We are not this story's author, who fills time and eternity with his purpose. Yet his purpose is achieved in our duty, and our duty is fulfilled in service to one another. Never tiring, never yielding, never finishing, we renew that purpose today to make our country more just and generous, to affirm the dignity of our lives and every life. This work continues. The story goes on, and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm. God bless you all, and God bless America.
George W. Bush, the first president of the 21st century, the 43rd president of the United States, in a speech as promised that was short in length and touched on fundamental themes that are important to him, beginning with citizenship, civility, opportunity, education, and duty. Also on the themes that he believed got him elected, of cutting taxes, a stronger defense, and reforming Medicare and Social Security.
Please stand now as Pastor Kirby John H. Caldwell will now deliver the benediction. And afterward, please remain standing for the singing of our national anthem, after which the ceremony will be concluded. I call upon Senator Dodd to organize the presidential party after the ceremony has ended to depart the platform. Pastor Caldwell.
Thank you, Senator McConnell. Let us pray, please. Almighty God, the supply and supplier of peace, prudent policy, and nonpartisanship, we bless your holy and righteous name. Thank you, O God, for blessing us with forgiveness, with faith, and with favor. Forgive us for choosing pride over purpose. Forgive us for choosing popularity over principles. And forgive us for choosing materialism over morals. Deliver us from these and all other evils and cast our sins into your sea of forgetfulness to be remembered no more. And Lord, not only do we thank you for our forgiveness, we thank you for faith. Faith to believe that every child can learn and no child will be left behind and no youth will be left out. Thank you for blessing us with the faith to believe that all of your leaders can sit down and reason with one another so that each American is blessed. Thank you for blessing us with the faith to believe that the walls of inequity can be torn down and the gaps between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, the uneducated and the educated can and will be closed. And Lord, lastly, we thank you for favor. We thank you for your divine favor. Let your favor be upon President Clinton and the outgoing administration. May they go forth in spiritual grace and civic greatness. And of course, oh Lord, let your divine favor be upon President George W. Bush and First Lady Laura Welch Bush and their family. We decree and declare that no weapon formed against them shall prosper. Let your divine favor be upon the Bush team and all Americans. With the rising of the sun and the going down of the same, may we grow in our willingness and ability to bless you and bless one another. We respectfully submit this humble prayer in the name that's above all other names, Jesus the Christ. Let all who agree say amen.
First salute from the Commander-in-Chief.
There is a hug given by the President to the Vice President. Vice President Al Gore, who now goes off to an uncertain future. He has not shared it with his closest advisors even about what he's going to do if he does in fact know. The President and the First Lady comes here knowing that he has won the election, but that he trailed his opponent by 500,000 votes. John Kennedy used to keep a note in his pocket with 118,000 votes on it because that's the margin by which he had won. There's the Vice President. It is the political reality going into this day. About 44% of the country said that they had high expectations for the new president. It's a wait-and-see attitude out there, the likes of which I can't remember for a long time. Now, as to the speech, all modern presidents have the curse of being measured against John Kennedy in 1960. Even the best of the speechmakers, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton included. That is one that will live forever. This, it seems to me, is a speech that is very reflective of George W. Bush. Workmanlike, short, and simple themes.
It's important to remember that John Kennedy felt he had the curse of Franklin Roosevelt to deal with. In fact, in the earlier draft of an inauguration, he had said all this will not be accomplished in the first 100 days. He slashed it out, and he made it 1,000 days. He didn't want to be compared with Roosevelt. Sadly, 1,000 days would be exactly the length of his life. So I think none of them like to be compared to the greats. So, of course, Lincoln stands above them all, so they don't even need to try.
Tom, if you read this speech 10 years from now, you would say it was written by someone who would be described as a compassionate conservative. That's who George Bush is. That's who he wants to be. And it was quite interesting in Kennedy's speech when he rallied the country to work on its behalf and against communism, if you will. It was a common enemy. The two big applause lines this morning, tax cuts and rebuilding our nation's defenses. Two themes that George Bush pounded away on his entire campaign. He seems to understand, and Bill Clinton has mentioned this regularly to people, that when you don't live in times of war, it's very hard to be perceived as a great president.
Indeed, I think that's right. Interestingly, though, he did talk about government having responsibilities for civil rights, for common schools, for public health. That's in contrast to Reagan, who said government is the problem, not the solution. So it shows that that compassionate conservatism has a somewhat different role for government than the traditional Republicans in the Reagan ideology.
Even Newt Gingrich says that this is a different time, and that this party has to reach out to people of color. Democrats have to reach out, on the other hand, to the center part of the country where people still have a faith-based ideology in many instances and respect their values. I think that there's a common recognition in Washington that the country longs for a healing and moving forward. It's a wariness, on the other hand, on the part of the Democrats. They don't want to be co-opted by him. They don't want to be drawn into something for which he gets all of the victories and all of the respect and gets all the political capital that comes around him in 2002 in the congressional elections. So this is going to be, for the next 18 months, a time of great wariness and people maneuvering out there on that dance floor called Washington.
How do you become victorious in the year 2002 by engaging in politics that are not perceived as being obstructionist? And Democrats haven't quite figured that out. And George W. Bush, on the other hand, has decided to rush Congress with education, with prescription drugs, and tax cuts, and try to get them to move very, very quickly. Tom, as we speak, in fact, the Senate is going to convene and in voice votes confirm much of Bush's cabinet, because they have to go to work Monday morning, even if they're in there alone. The secretaries of defense and agriculture will be there.
Chelsea Clinton and her father walking out. He's now the former president of the United States. It's not a bad job. Secret Service protection, you get a very substantial budget for office space where you'd like it. He's decided the Carnegie Hall location in New York, where his wife is the junior senator from that state, the junior senator who will get a lot of attention. It goes without saying. Let's go to NBC's Maria Shriver, who's down there in the VIP section, where she's been in the past as well. Maria?
That's right, Tom. We are here. Everybody, as you can see, is filing out. It was quite somber up here once the president-elect took the oath of office. Very quiet as he spoke, and clearly the whole family, everybody moving out now. When he walked up this part right where I am now, I saw him blow kisses and do a peace sign to all of his friends who are up here, who came here from Texas. There's been a lot of focus here on, obviously, former President Bush being the father of a president. We should not forget that Barbara Bush is probably the first woman in American history to see her husband sworn in as president and her son. So not to let all the attention be on the former president, because she's obviously such a pivotal figure. He came out as he walked through here, gave her 2 kisses, and spoke a few moments to his parents. Everybody here still wearing these ponchos, but still very happy. I have to say, not a lot of complaints, even though it's cold and dreary up here. People are excited. A lot of new cabinet members saying this was their first inauguration. Some obviously have been here before, our veterans, but some are new people here and are very excited about being up here on the platform. Everybody has Instamatics, so you get a real sense of excitement up here, I have to say. Tom?
Thank you very much, Maria Shriver. Now they'll be going to the luncheon that is traditional. It's in Statuary Hall here in the nation's capital, where they have statues of the heroes from the various states around the country. Congress gets together. There is a moment of conviviality, good cheer, celebrating the privilege that they all have in being in this seat of power. Someone who was crucial to George W. Bush in the course of that post-election period in the legal battle going on was Ted Olson, who came to Washington with William French Smith, who was the first Attorney General in the Ronald Reagan administration, and Ted Olson is there with NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea?
Thanks a lot, Tom. Some people might argue that George W. Bush might not have been taking this oath of office had you not been his lawyer.
Well, that's a nice thing to say, but I don't think that's the case. I think that the court would have decided what it decided no matter who was his lawyer. The court decided the case on the merits.
What was going through your mind as you stood here in the rain watching him take that oath?
Well, I think it's a beautiful moment. I think it's always a beautiful moment when a new president takes an oath of office. But of course, I feel a special feeling today because of the litigation in the Supreme Court case. And I think George W. Bush is going to be a fantastic president. And you feel that emotion coming from him today.
Were there times when the Florida Supreme Court ruled, other times when you thought this would never have happened?
There were lots of ups and downs. It was like a roller coaster, and there were huge ups and downs almost every day. Fortunately, it came out the way it did.
Do you think in his speech that he did enough to try to talk about unifying the nation? He talked a lot about civility. He talked about the pettiness of politics. He was really referring to that awful 5-week period, wasn't he?
He was reaching out, I thought, a lot throughout that speech, the words like compassion and civility and commitment. He used the C word a lot in that speech. I thought it was a beautiful speech, a moving speech and an open speech, a reaching out speech. And I think that's the theme that he wanted to set.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's part of my job. This talk of you being Solicitor General, representing the United States administration, the Bush administration in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, that would be something that you would be interested in doing if
well, I'm not going to comment on that.
But there have been conversations.
There have been. I've read things in the paper. That's all I would say.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you, Ted Olson. Back to you, Tim and Tom.
Thank you very much, Andrea. It's nice of you to mention your boss first before you get to Tom.
Good for you, Andrea.
Interview?
Andrea Mitchell, there with Ted Olson, who obviously is going to be a candidate for the Supreme Court on a very short list when vacancies do occur. And there is the expectation that Chief Justice William Rehnquist, whom we saw today presiding, will likely retire in the next 4 years now that he knows there's a Republican president in place, and that like-minded legal scholars and lawyers would be moved up to the court. The larger and more interesting question in some ways is whether Antonin Scalia becomes the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He was the man who vigorously led the court as it decided in favor of George W. Bush. Now, the two vice presidential couples coming down the steps, preparing, I think, to say goodbye to Bill Clinton, who is going to have to go by motorcade to Andrews Air Force Base, not by marine helicopter, which is the traditional means of transportation because of the weather. They say goodbye. They've known each other across party lines for some time, obviously. Curiously, Tipper Gore and Lynn Cheney shared some strong feelings about the popular culture in this country. Tipper Gore came to Washington and upset a lot of people in Hollywood with her very strong feelings about the lyrics and rock music and rap music, and saying there ought to be some parental and children's warnings printed on albums, and it became difficult for them from a political point of view. Lynn Cheney has been an outspoken critic of a good deal of the popular culture and the curriculum in schools and universities in the country, saying that there has been a terrible distortion, for example, of the teaching of American history.
That'll be Al Gore's last ride in a government automobile, Tom Brokaw. You mentioned Bill Clinton keeping Secret Service protection and having an office. Al Gore gets none of that.
No.
He gets a $90,000 pension because of his service in the Congress and the Senate and as vice president, but he's moving to a house in Arlington, Virginia. He'll drive his own car, stand in ticket lines at airports like the rest of us. It's going to be a culture shock, I would dare say, for Albert Gore.
It's always a culture shock. My favorite story is when Eisenhower went home after having been president, and he picked up a phone, having had phone calls made for him by secretaries for 20 years, and he hears this buzzing sound. He said, "What is this?" And he's been told, it's a dial tone. There's no operators anymore.
Yeah, to go from four-star general to president and then to a civilian life would be even a sharper drop. Let's watch this moment.
Good luck.
Take care of yourself.
Difficulties the Clinton family had during the course of their term of office, but I remember a wise man by the name of Bryce Harlow saying he watched Dwight Eisenhower take the oath of office, go to the White House, and know that from that moment forward, he was a man who was in some peril, because so many things can happen to a president of the United States over which they have no control or happen out of their line of sight. Unexpected events in the economy, international crises of one kind or another, people who work for them or are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing.
I think the new president just said to the new senator, I'll be seeing a lot of you.
Right. He's very at ease in these kinds of moments with people. He's always got a quick quip, quick nicknames for people. And now he walks back with Mrs. Bush, who has a designer in Dallas helping her with her wardrobe.
You know, President Clinton has told people, Tom, that his first year and a half, 2 years were difficult because they were disorganized. And it takes a while to learn how to be president. Certainly George W. Bush has the experience of having watched his father close up. But nonetheless, when you show up to work tomorrow morning, bright and early, you have to structure your day and structure the kind of administration you want. And that is not easy, particularly this one, Tom, because of the whole debacle in Florida. There is not a government in place for George W. Bush. He's lucky to have cabinet secretaries confirmed today. He will have a few. But they don't have deputies, they don't have assistants. There'll be a lot of empty desks in Washington tomorrow.
One thing they do have, for the most part, is experience. Not just those who have been in Washington before, like Don Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, but those people who come, as Tommy Thompson does from Wisconsin, where he was a governor, knows how to run things and get things done. Gail Norton, who is a controversial nominee for the Interior Department, had been an attorney general in Colorado. John Ashcroft, who is a senator, has been in this town and knows how to get things organized. We're joined now by David Gergen. I remember, David, when Al Haig was leaving office, when he had served as chief of staff for Richard Nixon, I said, what should incoming presidents know that they probably don't know? And he said, the physical management of the place is daunting. He said, it comes in here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, over the transom, under the door, through the windows, and from all over the world, decisions have to be made. And unless you have systems in place to just deal with the paper flow alone, you quickly drown in it. Now, I've shared that with incoming presidents and their advisors in the past, and the advisors have inevitably said to me 6 months later, you know, I should have listened to you a little more about all that. But it's true, isn't it?
The Carter administration, that would particularly hit Jimmy Carter. After that walk down Pennsylvania Avenue on this very day, those years ago, you know, within a week, he was taking home each night 450 pages of reading from his staff just to keep up with things. And you can't run the White House that way. I do not think the Bush White House will run that way. I think it'll be much more like the Eisenhower White House, and it's very, very orderly. They'll send him just what he needs to know.
Well, the fact is that the Republicans are better at organization for the most part. They tend to get people from corporate life, for example. They tend to have more people who have had military experience and that kind of discipline who come into their administrations, and they put a higher premium on it.
Right, and now we have the first MBA.
Right.
As president.
That's right.
Yeah.
Harvard, he does have very good academic credentials. Harvard Business School, Yale undergraduate degree, and Phillips Andover, where they're having a reunion of his class from prep school.
There's several hundred of them here. Katie Couric had to put on the Andover hat this morning.
Would you take...
David Gergen, you worked for President Clinton. Talk to us a little bit about the shakedown period that you observed, the president coming into his own, learning on the job, if you will.
I think it was a real shock to him, the kind Tom just mentioned. He said subsequently it took him a year and a half to learn how to do the job right. And the difficulty is this: your power all comes early, but your knowledge base is the smallest. You're the greenest early, and you have the most power. And what happens over time is your power goes down, and as you learn more about the job, you know, your experience goes way up. But the problem is, by the time you know how to do the job, your power can often be gone. And that's why it's so important to get off to a fast start. I think that's why George W. Bush will be well served by having these veterans. They have done this. They are playing it by the book. Everything they have done since the Florida decision has been by the book. And I think in that sense, they've done well.
When I asked him last week what will surprise us at the end of 100 days, he said, and it wasn't just a rhetorical flourish, he said, you'll be surprised by how much we get done. And what they're going to try to do is find that common ground in which they can get Democrats on board as well.
That's right. But you know, Tom, what was missing, so interesting in this speech today, you remember in his father's inaugural address, the most famous line out of that was, this is the age of the offered hand, There was no offered hand in this speech. There was a lot more iron.
We'll see how that plays out in the course of the next couple of days. And one of the things that you'll want to keep your eyes on, of course, is the meeting Wednesday between John McCain when he goes to the White House and the new president, because John McCain is determined to take the floor of the Senate and stay there as long as he has to until he gets campaign finance reform. So one president leaving town, the other one coming down the steps to the Capitol, preparing to go to his new address, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, where he'll review the parade and then spend the night after going to a number of inaugural balls. This part of American politics really hasn't changed all that much, Doris, over the years.
No, that's right. The parade has been a long time in coming, and it's really an important part of the pageantry, I think. I mean, we don't have a king, but we do have a president, and there should be that ritual in the parade. I think my favorite parade story is that John Kennedy, when he was watching his own parade, noticed that the Coast Guard contingent had no blacks in it. So he then contacted a young aide, actually my husband, Richard Goodwin, and said, do something about that. And Goodwin said, my God, it's the first time I realized it wasn't just words. We could actually do something. The next day, the order went out to integrate the Coast Guard. He noticed, even as he's watching. Right. Here it starts.
One of the bands in the parade will be from Crawford, Texas. Crawford, Texas is a wonderful but very tiny town out there northwest of Waco. They didn't have enough money to fly here, so they all drove here. It's a town that expects to have a little more prosperity now that George W. Bush has his ranch not too far away, and there are lots of signs on vacant lots saying, media, lease this space, as you drive through Crawford, Texas.
You know, Bob Kerrey mentioned it earlier, Tom, just the magic of this transformation of power. We take it for granted, but you don't realize how special it is. And when Bill Clinton was standing at the podium at the airport hangar without the presidential seal, it was so striking to me. He looked different to me. He sounded different to me. He was no longer the president. And in discussions with Robert Ray, the independent counsel, he was insistent that Bill Clinton enter into this legal agreement while he was still president. And I didn't quite understand it until you see today's events. Right. He wanted this official sanction, if you will, of a president of the United States still being held accountable. Right. And it would have been different if he had waited until next week as a former president.
True indeed.
Striking.
True indeed.
Absolutely.
The luncheon at the Statuary Hall had a kind of a unique twist. They served food from 3 different centuries, 1801, 1901, and 2001. They had a lobster pie, they had a fillet of beef, and they had, let's see, some vegetables from 2001, 2 wines, both from California, one a Cabernet and the other one a Chardonnay. 2,000 calories in the meal, Tim.
It sounds like one of Doris's lunches.
Right. 100 kilograms of fat. George W. Bush is a patient, a client, if you will, of Kenneth Cooper, who is the man who invented aerobics in America and is a big advocate of a low-fat, lean diet, lots of exercise and aerobics. George Bush told me that he hopes to exercise or work out an hour a day, and I suspect he won't be able to maintain that kind of a habit.
You know, at Franklin Roosevelt's 4th inaugural, that morning he read in the newspaper that his own housekeeper, who ran the White House Food Service, had rejected his own menu. She had this Germanic control over the White House. He had wanted chicken a la king. She decided she couldn't keep it hot for so many people, so it was chicken salad instead. At the end of the day, they made a joke, could you even find the chicken in the chicken salad? Because she was so frugal. So he kept saying, I wanted to be president for 4th term so I could fire her, but he never got around to doing it.
One of the changes is that this president doesn't drink. They will serve liquor in the White House. His father, it's well known, liked to take a martini at the end of the day, as did FDR
Lyndon Johnson and
Lyndon
FDR,
Johnson.
Absolutely. In fact, for FDR, that was his favorite moment, the cocktail hour, when he'd gather friends around, they'd tell stories. He wouldn't let anybody talk about the war. They could talk about movies, books they'd read, and relax with a drink so that he could replenish his energies for the day ahead. He'll have to find means to relax and replenish energies. They all have to do it somehow.
I'll bet that's a military coin the general is giving the new president, the commander-in-chief. That's become an exchange that military people have, a coin that they hand out representing their branch of the service and their particular unit. You can get a pretty good collection, but it's a treasure to have. the House Sergeant of Arms now moving him along, getting him into the motorcade so that he can start back down Pennsylvania Avenue.
And now he sits in the right-hand seat of the car, a seat that he gave Bill Clinton on the ride up to the Capitol. That's where the senior man sits in protocol, Tom, and it's now George W. Bush's for as long as he's president.
That's the new presidential limousine. And there, the new president and Mrs. Bush preparing to leave Capitol Hill to make that historic route down Pennsylvania Avenue to their new address at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Laura Bush in the back of the car, who has been a very important force in his life, his wife and soulmate and confidant since he met her in Midland at a barbecue and married her 3 months later. It's always perilous for anyone to go out on a limb on these occasions, but my guess is that Laura Bush is going to emerge in this administration as a real star. That she's very centered, has a great sense of self-confidence, and she has some objectives in terms of education and reading and literacy, and I think the country will take to her. Let's go to John Siegenthaler now down on the parade route. John?
Well, we've been talking a bit about security today, Tom, and this, of course, is a national security special event as designated by law, which means that the Secret Service, of course, is in charge of all security measures. It is the largest law enforcement presence at an inauguration in the history of the United States. Now, as President and Mrs. Bush head down Pennsylvania Avenue, we should tell you there are 3 times as many police along the route as there are as usual. At the same time, they've removed metal trash cans from the street. They've also got security checkpoints along the parade route, and they search spectators as they go in and out. So there's high security and concern here as we watch these protesters that Campbell talked about a little while ago get a little closer to the parade route. Tom?
Thank you, John. This probably raises the possibility that George and Laura Bush may not be able to get and walk along the parade route if there are protesters everywhere there, because even with the human shields that have been erected and all the other security considerations, you can't absolutely protect a first couple when they're exposed in open air. John Kennedy, obviously, was the last president to ride in an open-air car. We know the tragic consequences of that. At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, with a check on the weather, is Al Roker. Who else? Al?
Thanks a lot, Tom. As you can see, we showed you earlier, this area of the stands, there have been a whole lot of umbrellas up, but as you can see, the rain has kind of slowed down a little bit. We've got just the barest hint of some drizzle, and as people are filing in now to the presidential box, I don't know if it's any kind of a barometer, Tom, but I'll tell you, the biggest cheer yet went up when they introduced presidential nephew, George P. Bush. Obviously, a crowd favorite already. But the good news is the rain has kind of let up a bit. 36 degrees right now. The winds have died down. So Mother Nature is cooperating for the new president, George Bush, and his First Lady, Ms. Laura Bush.
And this gives you an idea of what the security is like on the parade route, which is now underway from the Capitol all the way down to the White House with George and Laura Bush, and then an assortment of military and community bands and floats following. There are protesters along the way, but as you can see, there is virtually a human shield all along the parade route. This is part of the reality of American life. Security is such an enormous consideration now. Tim and I have been talking about these presidential motorcades, even vice presidential motorcades, running 20, 24 cars at a time, not just in Washington, D.C., but wherever they go. Federal authorities insist it's all necessary given the level of threat that we don't know about, but they say they know about. That certainly, Doris, has been a huge change in American life.
Oh, absolutely. When you think about the fact that you used to be able to walk into the White House, actually, you could go in and wait inside for an appointment with the president. You could wander around the lawns. You could picnic on the lawns. I mean, we take for granted sometimes all of this change in our lives with locked cars and locked bicycles and obviously locked presidents. But it's a very sad loss in many ways for our country as a whole.
And it's true, Tim, not just for the president, but it's also true, as Mrs. Bush is about to find out, wherever she goes.
Absolutely. Hillary Clinton constantly tried to sneak out of the White House just to take a walk with her daughter and put a baseball cap on and sunglasses, but the Secret Service was always there because they're charged with the responsibility of protecting her. And God forbid something happened, they would be on the line. But it has now reached the sense, Tom, where even members of the United States Senate are questioning, do we really need this much? And what if you just put somebody in a van and had one support car with it? People wouldn't know who they were or where they're going, and it might be a lot safer than these 20-car motorcades, which stop traffic and create a certain excitement about them, which might, in fact, try to influence people to do something untoward. I think it has to be examined very, very seriously.
I do, absolutely. And I've talked to both President Clinton and Vice President Gore about it. They say they're powerless. It's up to the Secret Service. Back to Mrs. Bush for just a moment. Everybody will be watching her very carefully. She's not as well known as her husband, but she's about to be. NBC's Andrea Mitchell has been reporting on some of that for us as well. Andrea?
Thank you, Tom. I'm here with Martha Brandt, who is Newsweek's White House correspondent, having covered the Bushes for this entire year. And Martha, you have a piece coming out on Monday, I guess, on Laura Bush. Right. Laura Bush is such a different kind of first lady. We've already seen today the military announcer, when Hillary Clinton came down those steps, said, First Lady, Senator Hillary Clinton. That's not going to be Laura Bush.
Definitely not. She's painted herself as the anti-Hillary to some extent. And in fact, she's moving out of some prized real estate in the White House. She is not going to take the West Wing office, and the OEOB, the Old Executive Office Building space, is no longer going to be part of her domain, just a traditional East Wing office.
She caused a little bit of a stir with Katie Couric on the Today program this week when she said, in answer to a question, that she did not think Roe versus Wade should be overturned. And there was a great deal of discomfort in the Bush camp about the fact that she was speaking so explicitly about a controversial subject.
Right. She's never discussed it, despite the fact that reporters have pushed her again and again on the topic until now. Her aides insist that she was pressed. They feel like she was somewhat pushed into saying it, but indeed she did say it, and the timing's interesting given her husband's situation with the Ashcroft nomination.
Well, the transcript shows that she simply responded to the question, but one wonders, will she have the effect if people begin to believe that she's a bit more liberal on some of these issues than her husband, of helping him with women? There's a big gender gap, double digit, and there are a lot of Republican women across this country, as well as many Democratic women, who are concerned about the abortion question and other related issues.
Right. One of her friends said that she felt that Laura Bush had said it to reassure women. Whether she did or not, I don't know. But certainly she was able in Texas to extend an olive branch to all sorts of groups that weren't necessarily his constituency, women included, artists, writers. So I think she'll probably do the same thing here in Washington.
Now, whenever we talk about first ladies, we have to talk about the trivial, the appearance factor. Right. And any thoughts about, you're going to the ball to cover them tonight, the dress, all the excitement about that. How is she going to adjust to that, and to some criticism about style and fashion?
She's always been a reluctant public figure, and a couple of weeks ago when she came in that purple plaid outfit, she got some criticism. And her attitude was somewhat bemused or even amused, where she said, I can't believe they're writing about this. And she even said to a friend, can you believe they're writing about my shoes? So she's pretty centered. I don't think she'll change her style that much, but every First Lady gets fine-tuned, so to speak, in the course of 4 years.
One of the things that struck me also in an interview with Tom Brokaw earlier this week, or last weekend, she said that she had voted for Eugene McCarthy. This is not someone raised in Midland, Texas, but she was not raised as a strong Republican. She said to Tom that she was a Republican by marriage.
Absolutely. In fact, she was a Democrat. Although most Texans were until fairly recently.
But being a Democrat in Texas is being a yellow dog Democrat. It's not exactly being a liberal Democrat.
That's exactly right. But I think that there are suspicions, and her comment the other day to Katie Couric, that she isn't quite as conservative as her husband, and as we saw with her mother-in-law.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Martha Brandt. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. We should tell you as well, the president has already instructed his staff to take some actions. He told Andrew Card to make sure that a number of actions that President Bill Clinton had in his final hours in office, that they not be printed, those regulations, hoping to stop them, most of them having to do with setting aside lands in the West under the Monuments Act, and also dealing with the National Forest and the construction of roads into them. So that'll be a fight that will go on both in the courts and in Congress in the coming weeks. And as we watch a new president from a new generation coming down Pennsylvania Avenue with a cordon of security around him, George W. Bush in the middle of all of that, sitting in the right-hand seat of that new presidential limousine, we're joined by Michael Deaver, who was one of President Reagan's closest confidants and advisors, helped shape the image of Ronald Reagan, and has one of my very favorite inaugural stories when on the morning that Ronald Reagan was to be sworn in, Mike Deaver had to go knock on the door of his bedroom and say to him, Mike,
I said, Governor, it's 8:30. In a couple hours, you're going to be sworn in as the 40th President of the United States. And he raised up out of the covers and said, do I have to?
But then, with your help and the help of James Addison Baker, whom we have seen again recently here, and with the help of Ed Meese and others, the Reagan presidency had a daily message that it wanted to get out. It had an idea of what it wanted the country to see when it looked at Ronald Reagan.
Well, you know, when you look back on that, we had to change the economy. We were going to never be reelected, and so it really was more discipline than anything else. And it's one of the things that I see in this new young president who's coming in. He may be the most disciplined guy we've seen in a long time.
If you had to give him one piece of advice, though, Mike, as he goes into the White House, what would it be?
Well, I think it is to save yourself for the big decisions. It's, you know, set your priorities and stick to them, and don't worry about the rest of it. If you've got 2 or 3 things that you want to get done, then do that and let somebody else handle the rest of it.
There's always that temptation to respond to the last question in the White House press briefing room, though, isn't there?
I used to always hold my breath when somebody would say just one more, and the president would say, okay, I'll just take that one.
There's George W. Bush coming down. His Secret Service code name, Tumbler. His wife is Tempo. Remember Ronald Reagan's?
Right.
Secret Service code name, Mike Deaver?
Rawhide and Rainbow.
There you go. What do they come up with these?
I have no idea.
Do you have any influence over them?
No, none at all. No.
You know, Bill Clinton was Eagle, is Eagle. Hillary Clinton's Evergreen, and Roger Clinton, his brother, who he pardoned today, was Headache.
Maria Shriver's down there on that parade route as well. Maria, you still bundled up against the wet and cold conditions?
Yes, it is rather nippy out here, Tom. We're coming up Pennsylvania Avenue, but just past 6th Street. A lot of protest signs along this route. As you can see, the president's car is just over my right shoulder. A lot of abortion signs along here. A lot of signs, Bush cheated, mixed in with Bush Cheney signs. People kind of yelling, others yelling boo. He's got a clear view of all of this. You can see signs over here, no majority, no mandate. So a lot of different versions of people's politics out here today for the new president and the new first lady to see. But by and large, a lot of young people have been out here for a long time braving this weather, so they're pretty determined to have their voices heard and to get a glimpse of this president, which they hope he'll get out of his car in just a little bit and walk. No guarantee of that yet, but they seem to be a very vocal crowd. You can see signs like Bush Cheney, thank God, and they're mixed in with other signs down here that you can read for yourself. I don't know if I want to read on television some of them, but that's the crowd for this moment right here on Pennsylvania Avenue. Tom?
Thank you. Let's go to Campbell Brown now, who's at the scene of a sizable protest at Navy Memorial 6th in Pennsylvania. Campbell?
Well, Tom, there are a number of protesters here, but one of the more organized groups that has used this as a staging location is the National Organization for Women, and with me now is the president of that organization, Patricia Ireland. And you all have been very vocal in your opposition to the nomination of former Senator John Ashcroft as Bush's Attorney General. Ashcroft saying in his confirmation hearings that he was not going to seek to overturn Roe v. Wade. So why such a strong force here today?
Well, first of all, he has given all the right answers in the hearings, but the truth is that by nominating someone so extreme, the Bush-Cheney administration has just really galvanized and strengthened our movement. People are angry, they have a sense of fundamental injustice, and that's what brings them here.
And Tom, I can tell you there are some other protesters here in addition to your group, which has been peaceful in its protests. But right now, Tom, I don't know if you can see the picture, but as the motorcade makes its way down Pennsylvania Avenue, there's been pushing and shoving with police lined up along the street in riot gear in kind of a standoff with a small group of protesters, about 20 people, all dressed in black, who have been throwing debris into Pennsylvania Avenue and scuffling somewhat with police right now, and they are getting in a heightened state of alert as President Bush's car gets a little bit closer. Tom?
Thank you, Campbell Brown. Let's go back to Maria Shriver. Maria?
Tom, the protesting is now very intense as we're coming up here. A lot of National Organization for Women screaming fraud. Bush stole the election. The police are now in about 3 or 4 rows deep along here trying to push back protesters. People taking off their clothes, protesting fur. You can see right here, people down in the street being handcuffed. Police are in riot gear. A lot of screaming, a lot of pushing, a lot of yelling. It's hard to tell exactly how much the president can see, but he can hear all of this and see it. People very angry over here as we push back. The police standing at attention, as I said, 3 or 4 rows deep, and not taking any chances. So that's where we're coming up now a little bit onto Pennsylvania and about 9th Street. And there are, I see very few actual Bush-Cheney signs or pro-Bush signs in here. Back to you, Tom, as we'll come up here now on Pennsylvania 9th. You see police on horseback here, police in riot gear running over here to the side. It is quite an angry crowd, and then trying to mix in with quite a positive crowd. It's kind of hard to say who's in the majority right here. Some people here obviously trying to enjoy themselves, and others obviously here trying to make a very distinct point. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Maria Shriver. I don't remember a demonstration like this at an inauguration for a long time. The demonstrations that occurred in 1973 when Richard Nixon was elected to a second term were mostly about the war.
Right.
Watergate had not yet really risen to a national consciousness at that point. It was later in the spring that we were aware of that. Mike Deaver, this is a president who has 500,000 fewer votes in the popular tally than his opponent. That does present some special challenges to him from a political point of view, doesn't it?
It may, but you know, he seems to have decided that he's going to be more like Ronald Reagan and the note Reagan carried than the note JFK carried. Kennedy carried these numbers around with him, showing the closeness of the race. Reagan had something that he believed and had on his desk that said, yes, we can. And I think Bush is going to follow that more than he's going to follow the Kennedy model. I think he believes that I'm going to lead as if I have a mandate.
But Doris Kearns Goodwin, he is going to have to reach out to some groups who do feel disenfranchised, and he acknowledged that in his speech there today.
Right. Not as much as some previous presidents who had unusual circumstances acknowledged it. John Quincy Adams specifically said, you know, I know that there's peculiar circumstances that made me come here, and I know I have less confidence than previous predecessors, so I ask for your indulgence. I think he wanted more confidence than that, but he did reach out to Mr. Gore, at least in saying he conducted himself well and with honor and dignity.
Now, for those of you who are watching, obviously there will be intelligence agents, as it were, in that crowd. They'll be radioing those people who are walking alongside the limousine, telling them what they can expect as they approach different blocks along Pennsylvania Avenue. Maria, let's go back to you briefly.
Tom, as we're coming up here on Pennsylvania, about 10th Street, security is very intense, as you can see, all along the president's limo. People here seemed not to, quite as many signs as in the last block, but there's still more as we come up to the next block. A lot of people screaming, not our mandate, not our president. But then right in here, you see people who are holding signs called Celebrating America's Spirit Together, which is the theme of this inauguration. So I would say in this block right here, people seem very happy, optimistic. They have bleacher seats. So there might be supporters of the Bush-Cheney ticket. And then obviously in the last block, we had a lot of protests. So right now, I would say this is probably a good block. If he's going to get out, this would be the block to get out.
All right.
Back to you, Tom.
All right, thanks, Maria. Well, they did confine the protesters to certain areas. Gloomy day in terms of weather in Washington, D.C., but a very bright day, obviously, for the occupants of that presidential limousine. George W. Bush and Laura, the new president of the United States and First Lady. I don't know how much they're looking out the window. They're going to see some signs that are very critical of how they've gotten here, thinking that he lost the election, really. One sign saying re-elect Al Gore, other signs critical of his stance on abortion. Then a number of other freelance protesters about any number of issues, including fur. The police presence has been, as you can see, enormous throughout this parade route. We think that most of the protesters have been confined to a couple of blocks. And as the president gets closer to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the White House, of course, the reviewing stand, we do think he'll get out of the car with his wife and walk probably the last block or so. So far, there have been no untoward incidents. There have been some confrontations between the police. Earlier today, there were some fairly violent dust-ups as the protesters try to move out of their area and toward Pennsylvania Avenue, and more than a dozen arrests altogether, but no reports of injuries of any kind. Ann Curry is down there. Tim, let's go down and get a check from ground level. Ann?
All right, Tom, we're in fact missed a lot of the protesters here on Freedom Plaza. There are thousands of people here. They're carrying all kinds of signs. Hail to the thief is what many of the signs read. The day that democracy died, Bush equals racism, Mother Earth is crying, Ashcroft, some bad signs about Ashcroft. So a lot of different sentiments being represented here. A lot of very angry people gathered. However, we should also point out that just behind all of these protesters here in the stands, Tim, make a turn over here. You can see there are some supporters here for, can you make a turn here, Tim? And you see the supporters are also standing and waiting to see President George W. Bush and Mrs. Bush come by. But we've heard a lot of booing, Tom, a lot of very upset people. No question that this is going to be a very mixed and very loud crowd as this motorcade passes, which should be any time now, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Ann Curry. Let's go right back to Maria now, where she is tracking the presidential motorcade progress and its pause there on Pennsylvania Avenue. Maria?
That's right, Tom. We paused at about Pennsylvania and 13th, which is not a very good place to pause a motorcade since it seems to be filled with protesters who are carrying the signs. You can see them. You are not my leader. Depose King George. Hail to the thief. Pictures of the president saying wanted for murder, for death penalty, illegitimate Bush. Very, very tough signs here. As I said, the motorcade has stopped about a couple feet further down here. A lot of very angry people. You can see the lines, about 4 or 5 rows of police thick right here where we have stopped. It's called Checkpoint 4. And they're screaming and chanting, not my president, not our president. So we're here, we're stopped. As I said, the president's car, you can see over my shoulder back here. Several of the cops kind of looking around, wondering, I think, what is the reason that we've stopped. But I guess there's a little bit of a tie-up, so I'll send it back to you. Tom?
All right, thanks, Maria Shriver. This president did lose the popular vote. He did invoke the need for civility and compassion today in his inaugural address. That obviously will be the great test for him in the opening days, the opening hours of his administration, how he puts this country back together again politically. Obviously, there are protesters that he'll never satisfy because they take positions that are completely opposite to his own beliefs. But nonetheless, he has to lower the temperature in Washington if he is to be successful. You can't have this kind of a stalemate. It's also worth pointing out that while these people have every right to be there, and these are the expressions of their most deeply held beliefs, we don't know for sure just how many they represent across America. About 44% of the country in recent polls have said that they don't have high expectations for George W. Bush, but most Americans, for a new president, give them a wide margin to succeed and hope that they will. As we watch George W. Bush make his way to the White House, we're joined by the author of this book, A Different Drummer, Michael Deaver, My 30 Years with Ronald Reagan. Obviously, the country wants to know how the Gipper is doing. He had that fall and broke his hip recently, and he'll be 90 years old on February 2nd.
90 years old, and I think, according to Nancy, he is recuperating pretty well, up and taking food, and surprising everybody once again.
When you look at these scenes, is it a moment of instant deja vu?
Oh, a lot of nostalgia when you look back and remember those wonderful days, particularly in the first 5 years with him.
As an image maker, when you see a lot of the negative signs, Mike Deaver, how would you explain that to the president?
Well, of course, the president, I always got a kick out of him because you go through New York City with thousands of people, and he'd remember that one guy that was giving him the raspberry.
But he was also the president who told that wonderful story about the boy who came down in the morning and found the pile of manure and went digging through it saying, I know there's a pony in there somewhere. Right. He was always the essential optimist, wasn't he?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's a quality that he's going to have, George W. Bush.
In spades.
All right. Thanks very much, Michael Deaver, for being with us. We're going to go back to Maria Shriver now.
Marines, the Navy. I just, these are kind of what seems to be somewhat VIP. I can hear you.
Let's go to Al Roker. We're having a little trouble with Maria's technical connection. Al Roker's down there on the ground, I think right by the reviewing stand. Looks like the weather's picking up and a little better, Al.
It is, Tom. It stopped raining now. It's just a little breezy. The Continental Corps is coming by right now, and we've had the entire crowd on its feet. Everybody in the reviewing stand, as you can see, they are on their feet as well. The president, the former president, President Bush and Mrs. Bush, clapping as all of the corps go by, and we're looking down Pennsylvania, and we haven't seen the motorcade yet. It's still around the corner, has not made the turn yet back onto Pennsylvania Avenue, but people excited, they're on their feet and enjoying what seems to be at least a little bit of a break in the weather, and all excited about greeting the new president, Tom.
Thank you very much, Al Roker. When George Bush the Sr. and Barbara Bush walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, when they got to about that location, Barbara Bush broke away from her husband and raced across the street and kissed Willard Scott. When I saw her last night, she said, you know, they're still talking about that. She said, I had no idea that anyone noticed. It was her first real lesson in what it's like to be First Lady. They notice everything.
You're putting an awful lot of pressure on Al Roker.
That's true.
Let's see if he can get Laura Bush, huh?
Oh, your contract doesn't depend on that, Al, but your bonus does. Let's go to Claire Shipman now at the White House. Claire?
Well, Tom, we've been waiting here at the White House, as you know, for about an hour, hour and a half. A lot of the president's cabinet is all here, a lot of his family. We've seen them walk by. They've been in the stands. It is very wet. I'm sure they're all very cold, but the crowd's getting very excited now that, as you can see, the motorcade is making that final turn. We've also been told to expect that Bush will get out of his, looks like he's going to do it now, get out of his car right around this turn and walk the rest of the way. It's a much more secure area, and usually the Secret Service does not mind the president making this final walk because it is an area that they feel they can secure. Once he reaches the reviewing stand, he may decide to walk right up into the stand as his father did, or come through the White House. We'll wait and see, Tom.
All right, thank you very much, Claire Shipman. Let's go to Maria Shriver now, who's down there in the thick of it all.
Tom, you can see the president has just gotten out of his limo. This is the place to get out. As I said earlier, he should stay in the car right now. It's a good place. You can see him getting out. There's a lot of people here. Texas hats on there. He seems to be walking over in this direction. I can't see that much behind me, but everybody here, there are no protest signs here. These seems to be people who obviously love their new president, are excited to see him. They've all got Texas hats on, and seem to be excited with the prospect that he could get out, that they could see him up close and personal. I don't know how much you can see over my own shoulder back here. He's waving to the crowd. I don't know if you can see the shot of him, and holding his wife's hand, walking there right behind his car. It's over here now. I don't know how much you can actually see of him. Obviously, the security very tight. The weather, it's still raining, but not obviously as hard as it has been. And these are people that came out to support this man and Cheney, Vice President Cheney. As I say, a lot of people with Texas hats on. These are people who have tickets, who want to be here, who regard this man as their president. You can see the reserve signs. So these are Bush-Cheney supporters. We're coming upon the reviewing stand where the president's family is, so that obviously will be an emotional moment. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Maria. We're going to just take a moment and let the president and the First Lady walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, and let all of you just enjoy or reflect on this moment, or however you may feel about it, have your own feelings about it. Let's just have this television moment for the new First Family. now past what is the east entrance to the White House, which is a social entrance for many occasions. That's the Treasury Department that you see back there with the columns on the left side of your screen.
Hey, we need to keep this bill.
And the media.
This is a man who just about 10 years ago really decided on his course in life after he bought the Texas Rangers with a group of friends and financial partners and made about $10 million on the sale, ran for governor of Texas, served 6 years, ran for president, and won in one of the most contested elections in American presidential history by just one more electoral vote than he needed and 500,000 fewer popular votes than his opponent got. There's his family. So this is a moment in American history unlike any other that we have been witness to. We're joined by General Wesley Clark, who many of you will remember as the commander of NATO forces during the bombing in Kosovo, a fellow Arkansan with Bill Clinton and West Point graduate, now retired. General Clark, we've been hearing from this president and from General Powell as well, who's the new Secretary of State, that they don't think that the United States ought to be as involved as it has been in Central Europe. Think that's a good idea?
We heard some of those expressions early, but what I'm hearing lately is a lot more continuity. I think we're going to see this administration take a very measured course in looking at those commitments. They're listening to the allies. They've gotten some voices of concern from Europe, and I think they will take a look at what's going on over there, how much the allies are really doing now before they make any rapid moves.
What are the other hotspots in the world that concern you as you look forward to the next 4 years?
Well, I think that first and foremost has to be the Middle East and what's going on between Israel and Palestine. That's a powdered keg. It's going to require a lot of presidential attention. I think beyond that, there are some very important policy issues. This administration, which is committed to national missile defense, and that is a very controversial topic, not only with Russia and China, but with our NATO allies. There are going to be issues with China. China's got to come into the World Trade Organization, but are we going to sell arms to Taiwan?
Twice, this new president has told me that he would be willing to consider building a missile defense shield jointly with the Russians. Think that's realistic?
Well, I think there are some important issues that have to be worked in that respect. The technology, the sharing of the information. But I think that all options have to be discussed. And so I think a lot of people would be very interested in hearing how he'd propose to discuss that.
We'll also point out, General Clark, that today we have an announcement from the Middle East that the Palestinians and the Israelis are going to start what they call a marathon peace negotiation in Egypt. So that is the final legacy of Bill Clinton as he goes out of office. He tried so hard to get a deal, but at least they've kick-started the process again. Where it'll go, we don't know. And that goes right onto the agenda of this man that we're watching now. Let's go down to Al Roker, who is on the parade route. Al?
Well, Tom, the president and First Lady have now since passed, heading down Pennsylvania Avenue to swing around to the South Lawn and then come back out onto the reviewing stand. They just announced the president and the First Lady. A cheer has gone up from the crowd. So it's, I guess they've walked through now, and I didn't get the kiss, Tom. I didn't get the kiss.
Well,
I think it's the fact I didn't have the banaka with me.
Okay, Al Roker, who will be working on the quality of his breath control, and we'll be back after this.